So on this week's episode of Love Fly Podcast, we welcome Jessica Burns. Hi, Jessica.
Hello.
So, Jessica, tell the listeners and the viewers, obviously on YouTube as well, a little bit about you, what you do, your background, your stuff, and then we'll get into some questions, which I'm sure they will love.
All right. So I am a licensed aircraft maintenance engineer here in Canada. We're governed by Transport Canada. I did my apprenticeship actually up north in the far reaches of the Northwest Territories in Yellowknife. And then I came back to Ontario and started working for the airlines. And then when one of our bigger airlines started, I started working for them, and I was with them for about 18 years. And in that time, so I fixed the aircraft. And then in the tail end of my career there, I ended up going into safety. So the technical operations safety department. And then I also became a trainer as well. And then I retired out early and I became a professor of aircraft maintenance. So now I teach at the college, an approved training organization, the next generation of aircraft maintenance engineers.
Wow.
That's what I do. Yeah.
Wow. This is all that's thinking. So you are a superb guest. We've wanted to have somebody with your background for ages. I've kind of had a few people kind of similar, but you sound perfect. Great. So tell us a little bit then about how it all works. Like, when you say you have to be, you do the maintenance and do all the stuff that you've done. How is that kind of regulated? How is it all, so that's reassuring stuff. I guess that's what I'm after.
So we could start right at the very beginning. A lot of people don't know much about aircraft maintenance. It actually became apparent because here in Canada, there was an airline that actually went on strike. And a lot of people were like, oh, you just put the bags on the airplane, you just fuel the aircraft. And we're kind of like, well, that's not actually what we do. And it was a great learning moment for the general public to understand what an aircraft maintenance engineer does and what our responsibilities are. And I think it opened the eyes to public. So first of all, we can talk about the training. A lot of people don't realize how much training that goes into becoming an aircraft mechanic. Again, just on LinkedIn, we had some comments. It's just like, oh, it's a 7-week program, and and you're expected to be paid this. Like, what are these people getting this information from?
Yes.
So in Canada, and I'm sure it's regulated for EASA in Europe and FAA, very similar. It's called an approved training organization. So the governing body, so here in Canada, Transport Canada, EASA for Europe, FAA for the States, right? So they have basically a lesson plan on what needs to be taught, the basic knowledge to be taught. So that gets taught at an approved training organization. All of us are licensed engineers who teach it. The students can actually not miss very much of that school, because if they lose 5% in the 2 years that they're there, they lose their accreditation. So they have to attend every class. They have to complete all their mandatory projects. And then they have to actually pass with a 70% in every class and above to get their accreditation.
Okay.
So that basically, they get taught everything from theory of flight, fuel systems, hydraulic systems, all the basics. So that's just the start of it. And then when they finish their schooling and they get their 18-month accreditation, then they go to do their apprenticeship. So, for example, the airlines, they will go to the airlines and they will start working for them. And then they have a logbook. That logbook has several tasks that they have to complete. And just like a trade, basically all get signed off by a licensed engineer overseeing their work, making sure that they know how to do it, know how to complete it. Once they complete that and they put in about 2.5 years of apprenticeship, usually it takes a little bit longer, somewhere anywhere between 2 and 5 years.
Hang on, 2.5 years. Oh my goodness.
2.5 years, that's minimum. Like
minimum. Yeah.
There's to get all those tasks signed off, we'd say about 4 years to get the task signed off. So you've got your 2 years of school, then you've got 4 years, about a 2.5 to 4 years of apprenticeship to get all these signed off. Then you have to bring it to your governing body, your logbook, all of your information. Then that governing body will say, okay, you can write our regulations exam. So then you have to pass this regulatory exam. For us here in Canada, it's a written exam, whereas I believe in EASA and in the States, it is actually a practical and a written exam.
Yeah.
Right. And then, so once you get that, once you pass that, then you become a licensed engineer. But again, that doesn't mean you can sign an aircraft out safe to fly yet. So from there, whatever company you work for, so if I'm working for, the big carriers like British Airways or Air Canada or WestJet, they have to send you on a type endorsement. So for example, WestJet, I'll say because that's the company I work for, we have 787s. We did have a 767, 737, Q400. Just because I'm a licensed engineer, I can't sign out the work yet to say that it's safe to fly.
Yeah.
They will now send me on an endorsement course per aircraft, right?
Yeah.
So for the 787, you get sent for an 8-week course with Boeing, the manufacturer, and they will do the course. You do a 6-week course, and then you do practical testing. So all of this stuff, you're away from home, you do all this testing. And then once they do that, then they say, here, you have this endorsement course. Then the company gives you an exam as well, saying, you have to take this exam to make sure that you are good, you know all of our policies, and then you become a signing authority just for that aircraft. So now, let's say I took the 787 endorsement course. I'm a licensed engineer, but I am now endorsed to sign all the maintenance work safe for that 787. But it doesn't mean that I can sign out the rest of the fleet. You have to go through that same process now for endorsement. And so now if I move to companies, I have to make sure that you carry that certificate, but you still have to take their ACA, it's called, a certification authority, to sign up those aircraft. So you can see just the training to get to the point where you can sign in an aircraft safe to fly. And that's basically ultimately what we can do. There's a lot that's involved in that.
You've got to love it, haven't you, to go through all of that?
Oh, yes.
My goodness. I mean, I knew some of that, but I didn't realize how long that was. That's great. That's the great thing about this podcast. I'm always learning stuff. That's quite remarkable. And I guess along the way, you lose a few people who don't make the grade, who decide it's not for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So once you've got into a company, you've been signed off for a type, and then you can only sign off that type. What does that actually mean in terms of like day to day, like, who's checking who, that sort of stuff,
The way it works, so mostly on a crew, your crew will have apprentices and licensed engineers who aren't endorsed, and then there'll be a group of endorsed engineers. And what happens is an aircraft, for example, will come from, we'll say Airbus or Boeing. They'll have it's like your car, right? They have a maintenance schedule that has to be followed. So no different. I always, when I talk to my students about it, I talk about a car. So after, how many kilometers, you need an oil change, right? You need your tires rotated, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
With a car. So with an aircraft, very similar, but we have different intervals. So some of our components go by calendar days. So you'll have to do a daily inspection, which is your basic inspection, which you see, most people will see an engineer walking around, checking the lights, checking the tire pressures, checking the oil, make sure the levels are good, and just doing a general walk around of the aircraft.
Just like we do on our cars every day. That hot.
Yeah. So we call that a daily inspection. And then you've got your pilots also do their walk around before the flight. So it's my set of eyes, then the pilot's set of eyes. So now you've got two sets of, and that's just a daily. We do that on a regular. And then of course, once that plane starts flying, so we have something called calendar days, like I said. So every how many calendar days something or a component has to get checked.
Yeah.
Then we have something called cycles, right? So cycle is every time an aircraft takes off, wheels up, wheels down is considered one cycle. So if you have a cycle, we count those cycles. So again, with the engine, with the airframe, all the different systems, they'll say every 500 cycles, you need to change the filter on this. So same thing, we bring the aircraft in every 500 cycles and we'll change, I don't know, a fuel filter and oil filter, something like that, right?
They let you just ask them. That's great. Sorry, Jessica, just because I think that's really interesting. So because you compared it to the car. So I've got a log, I've got a manual in my car that says that 80,000 miles you need to change the cam belt, but I can't be bothered, so I leave it. How's it different with aviation?
So different. We can't just be like, "Ah, she looks good. We're not going to do it." It's so regulated that these manufacturers say, no, at this many cycles, you have to replace this part. And it's well before failure. It's well before it's worn out. They give so much ample room for us to change these parts. With a car, realistically, it's funny. If you actually were to do everything that it listed, because everyone's like, oh, it's a scam, right? But if you were to change all the components it tells you, your car would run like a top. But in the car world with personal, we're like, oh, she's good. We'll run to failure, right? And thank goodness in the aircraft world we do not do that, right? So it's funny because even talking to some of the professors, there's so many things that we've done. For example, a hydraulic pump. After so many cycles, we have to change this hydraulic pump. And we talk about if it were to fail, this is how we know. We check for metal particles in a filter, etc. And you ask people, how many times have you actually seen that? And a handful will say, I've never changed a pump in my life. Why? Because we've done all this preventative maintenance in the past.
Yes.
Right? So cycles, wheels up, wheels down. And then we also have airtime. So airtime is when that aircraft is flying. And that's sort of like your mileage on the car, right? So now we're counting from the minute it takes off, it's flying, we count that time. And again, we have all of these manufactured not recommended, that's the actual schedule that you have to replace this thing. And then on top of that, so you've got all this stuff. So that's our regular maintenance. So it keeps us in the hangar quite busy just with the regular maintenance because you've got a fleet of aircraft. But then we also, if your brakes are low, we have to change that stuff. So we call that line maintenance. That's sort of the day-to-day when you do that walk around, when you're doing regular stuff, if something's broken, if a pilot comes in and they have a light on it, they're kind of questioning, this doesn't look right. Can you come and check this out? So we'll go and take a look at it. And then we'll fix that as well. So what an aircraft maintenance engineer does, we basically, when you're assigning authority on that aircraft, once that maintenance performed, we overlook all the maintenance that's performed. So we work on it from tail to nose, wingtip to wingtip, and then we can sign out that plane to fly. And according to regulation, an aircraft cannot fly without our signature. So if we deem it, she's not flying, then she won't go, right?
Yeah, that's very reassuring because I think one of the questions that often comes up is with, I suppose Southwest or something. Maybe there's just a smaller airline where they have the not a small airline, but they have the short hops, and people worry about. I've heard that. I've seen that question so many times. I try to reassure them. Because with the long haul, you're going to land after 9 hours. There's going to have a mask check over and everything. But with the short ones where you might have 30-minute turnaround, people kind of go, well, how's that work? So what could you say that would reassure the public?
It's exactly that. It doesn't matter. So wheels up, wheels down. So if we're flying from England over to Canada, right, that's wheels up, wheels down. That's one cycle. So you could do a couple of those flights before we have to do some checks. But if you're doing these little hops, I know that Europe has aircraft that fly to all these different destinations. Those little hops still count those cycles. So if you have 5 cycles in a day, then by the time that plane goes down, then those checks will come frequently, right? So we're going to be checking those flights more frequently as opposed to, a little bit longer because the cycles were longer with a longer flight. But what the general public don't realize is they should check the tail numbers because a lot of the times those short hops, it's not the same aircraft that you're actually jumping back on, right? After so many cycles, that plane will go get checked out. And then a new plane is going out and taking off and flying, right? So, and they get checked frequently. Like I said, airtime, cycles, the calendar days, even with short hops, it just means that those schedules of maintenance are getting tightened. So at night when it comes down, they'll be more frequent. Their work packages will be a lot bigger than, say, one that only did one flight from Europe to Canada kind of thing, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's the thing. So if it came in for 30 minutes, what would you reasonably do in that time?
So a 30-minute turnaround, I know for us, it depends on the maintenance base. So you might not have maintenance personnel in some bases. So for that, it's just the pilot doing their quick walk around, right? Because we've done that schedule enough. So you have maintenance planners as another layer. Maintenance planners I always tell them they're the shell game people, right? So a maintenance planner will say, we're going to fly you here, here, here. You don't have any maintenance there. So it's called risk managed. So if, let's say, a pilot gets a light on, they're going to actually have to send an engineer over to that aircraft to fix it. But if everything goes great, that plane can fly, do all their flights, and then land back at a maintenance base so that all the maintenance can get performed. So you will not get a daily on every flight that takes off. However, a pilot knows what to look for, and they'll do their walk around for us. But a maintenance planner will plan it in such a way that it will make it back to a maintenance base so that all the cycles and all the stuff that are part of that schedule will get looked at before it takes off again. So that's sort of how that works.
That's helpful. Really reassuring. That's good. Thank you. So the thing so I'm just going to chuck a couple of questions if I may. So when you sort of later on in your career, you moved into the safety side, and I was just curious about that. Like, how does that apply to? I mean, obviously, lots of things you said are riddled with safety, but could you be, just like really spell it out what that actually means in terms of safety?
So we have something here in Canada called the safety management system. And basically what happens is we will, as a company, regulate ourselves. So we will continually look at small things that have happened, bigger things that have happened. So basically we'll get reports. And if an incident happened that, let's say, it was discovered that someone installed the wrong size bolt, everything's fine, but someone was just like, hey, this was the wrong size bolt. They'll put it into the safety department. We'll look at it. Then we'll actually try to fix it organizationally so that it never happens again, right? There was an incident at a company once that had, it was a part number that was, the part number was written, no, the part inside the bag was not the correct part. And an engineer caught it. An engineer found it and said, hey, this isn't the right part. We verified it didn't match the baggie that it said. So we went to stores, we looked at it. It doesn't just end there. So then that comes to my plate and it says, how did this happen? So we have something called taproot, or there's lots of different things, fishbone and the 5 Ys. There's all these safety, words that we use, buzzwords. And basically it's not just, oh, well, someone made a mistake. Oh, well, it's how can we improve this so it doesn't happen again? So we actually get to the root of the cause, and then we'll try to put things in place. So it was like, okay, well, it was received. It was put in this wrong bag. Okay, so we had to talk to the receiving people and say, you guys need to be more diligent. You guys need to now measure to make sure that it's the correct part. Okay. Then the next layer, it goes to the sort of the warehouse, the stores people. And okay, with you guys, you need to also measure this before you put it on the shelf. So now it's already been checked by 2 people, right? And then we put it into our system that if you actually type in the number from the bag, it'll say, no, that's not good for this job that you're doing, right? And then it gets to the engineer, and then the engineer will also double check. Okay, this is the correct part against the publications. So now it's gone through so many eyes. So we hope, and then we do an audit on this. So let's say we implement all this, and then on top of that, so for tech training, that's what I would do every year, annual training. I will collect all of these big incidents, so to speak, and teach it out to all the engineers. So every engineer at the company will get recurrent training. So I'll say, okay, guys, we forgot to do this. This is what happened. We found this. So now everyone, and we take out names. We don't say, well, Bob did this, right? It's basically like, and we don't even talk about the aircraft. It's just, hey,
Did it, Bob? I mean, it's all right.
Then it was like, this is the incident that happened. And then people will give feedback. Oh, I can see how that happened, or how did this happen, right? Well, this is all the stuff we put in place. So now when you go out, just make sure you're more diligent to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So all stuff, this doesn't, this gets regulated on a regular basis, but you can see all the layers. And again, what we're trying to achieve is to really mitigate any incidents from happening again. Something as simple as a circuit breaker. So a circuit breaker is like a fuse, right? Yeah. When you perform maintenance, we pull a circuit breaker so we don't get electrocuted. We fix the part, and then you push that circuit breaker back in. And there's been occasions where the circuit breaker is left out. A pilot will catch it. So a pilot does their check, lots of layers, and they say, hey, there's a circuit breaker out. So they call us maintenance back out. We push it back in. That little incident, even though it's just, oh, you know what? Maintenance forgot to push that breaker and it's all good. that will make it back to safety. Again, exactly the same thing. What happened? I forgot. Well, what happened? Well, I worked so many night shifts in a row. I was very fatigued. So we actually look at this, and then we how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? We start to look at shifts. So again, we always get to the root cause, and that's generally what we do. We don't blame someone and say, okay, well, again, Bob, you forgot to put that circuit breaker back in. They were taking your. I know it's not going to fix your aircraft. But yeah, so all of these little things that you might seem as very small will still work its way to the safety desk. Again, we look at it, all of these things get laid out. We have newsletters that go out to the company. And then if we see something, say we see a defective part, something much bigger. So a part comes in from who knows what, and we see a defective part. We have things called service difficulty reports. So we actually will put that out into the industry, and it will say, hey, this is sort of something funny we found with this component. Has anyone else sort of seen that? So we'll give it to manufacturer. They'll send out alerts. Transport Canada, same thing. And basically every licensed engineer, we get these alerts monthly, even sometimes more frequently. So we can all take a look and go, oh, well, we fly these aircraft. Let's take a look to see if we're having any of these issues. Yeah. So there's constant, and then all our regulatory boards talk to everyone. So we'll call FAA and say, hey, Southwest flies 737s, and we'll say, hey, we found a couple of these, there's an issue with these. Have you guys found that problem too? So these service difficulty reports get published to everyone who flies these aircraft, and we just share the knowledge. That's what it is, right? So
that's fascinating, isn't it? That is, that there's no competitive thing there. It's just about sharing safety knowledge.
It's all about safety. And then, for example, if something happens and our regulatory body deems it, you know what? Let's check out this aircraft. So people panic when they say, oh, they're grounding the fleet. Why are they grounding these aircraft? Something's wrong. No, it's totally preventative. So there might have been one incident that happened, but it warrants enough that the regulatory body says, you know what? Before all these aircraft fly, let's take a look at this component. So ground the fleet across the world. We all go look at our aircraft. No, she's good. Okay, they're all up and flying again, right? Or if you find something, hey, we'll flag it and say, we also found this problem too. And then, okay, well, they need a fix before it goes flying again. So there's stuff called ADs and then an SBs. So basically this will come out, and if it's an AD, you have to, an airworthiness directive, you have to change that part. So if for some reason someone found something and the regulatory body said, you know what, this warrants an AD, they'll give us a certain number of cycles or hours or calendar days to replace that component or to check that component or operationally check it before it goes flying again. So we'll cycle our aircraft in, we'll do those checks to make sure the planes are flying again, right? So
that's very reassuring. And I guess we've had similar messages, but each time that's confirmed, like you've just done it there, that's really helpful because people, it's all this stuff that's going on. And this is all that you have to do. This is not like, it'd be nice to do. It's like, these are things that
you have to do it. You cannot, so as an engineer, we sign it. Basically, if an AD is done or if something's done, so this is called willful noncompliance. If you were to sign it and just go, she's good to go, I could actually go to jail. So that is our license, and our integrity is key. And we always say, so when a pilot flies an aircraft, when they take off and they land, their job's done, everything's great. When I change a component and I've signed that out in the logbook, that's it. Legally, that is with that aircraft. If something happens because of something that I've done, I will also get investigated down the road or whatever. Hey, what happened? You were the last person to sign this off. So our name carries it. So there's a lot of pressure. And that's why for us, what I teach out, what I, even when I was in safety, it's always don't sign anything out unless we call it the ghost of the doubt. If you have any inkling that something's a bit off, don't sign it out. Go back, check your work, check it out. Get a second set of eyes. That's one thing, when you work in the industry too, you don't, like, oh, I'm the best. I'm so great at this. I'm not going to get anyone to check. We're very open. Hey, you know what? I changed this part. I'm a little tired. Can you take a look? Someone will also look. Someone else will look. We all say it's good. We do our operational checks and then we'll sign it out to fly, right? It's not a pride thing, right? So
yeah, no, and this is quite an interesting thing because But on the one hand, when you sign, you could be investigated later. So you are accountable. But actually, when you're working with others and you're working with across airlines, it's kind of like no blame, isn't it? So that's why I always find that interesting. I hear that no matter which airline I talk to, I hear that common thing, which is phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can just say, "Oh, could you check this?" Because that, if you can imagine like other businesses work like that, it'd be so refreshing, wouldn't it? That you could say, "Oh, I don't know," or I think I've screwed up because and people would just put their hands up. Wouldn't life be nicer?
We want that. We want that in safety. We want people to say, hey, even in the documentation, let's just say, a company puts out documentation. It doesn't make sense. Like it reads kind of weird. You can call up the manufacturer and be like, this is sort of weird. And then you can talk to other engineers. You can actually put in reports saying, the flow of this doesn't go well. And then they'll take a look. I mean, sometimes they won't change it, but for the most part, they'll look at it and say, okay, well, maybe we'll move this order and whatever, right? So there's so many, it's always a dynamic, we're flying them, we're fixing them. So as the problems come about, we send it back to manufacturer. There's always a loop, an open loop. It's not just, here's how you fix the airplane, here it is, see you later, that's it. Most bigger companies will actually have manufacturer engineers. They're still employed by manufacturer, but they will sit with the company. We have an office for them. And just so that if something weird comes up or we have questions, we have a direct link instead of having to sit on the phone for customer service. So we'll have a Boeing rep, for example, sit with us, or an Airbus rep sit with you. Right.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really good. So one of the questions that comes up with people they worry about, because you've kind of touched on it, so we're just going to sort of zoom in on it. They're sort of like checking each other's work thing. So how does that go? Like, so you're like the final sign off, or are there other people that would sign you off? How does that work?
So I'm the final sign off. However, if it's a critical component, so there's certain things like engine controls, certain things are flight controls. We have something called a dual inspection. So I will sign off all my work, but then you will have an independent engineer come in who actually typically hasn't worked on it. So fresh set of eyes, haven't touched the thing. They'll come and they will do a dual inspection and they'll sign that off, right? But something like a tire change, for example, if I do a tire change, I'll change the tire out. And then it'll be my signature signing it out. However, if an engineer who doesn't have a signing authority or the change that, because they're completely capable, so this licensed engineer changes that tire, I will go over, check their work because my signature is actually going on their work, right? So they'll sign it, and then I sort of stamp of approval as an engineer saying, okay, yeah, she's good, right? Yeah,
That's good. And so how many? So that thing about so they might not have the ability to sign. Is that because they haven't got to your level yet? Is that what?
They haven't taken the endorsement course yet. So typically companies, just because you're a licensed engineer, they don't say, you know what, now you've got your licensed engineer, we're going to send you on that 787 course. No, let's give you some experience working on that. And then you basically earn it. The company will then decide, okay, you know what, there's an endorsement coming up. We'll send a couple people on that endorsement course, right? And it's the same people who do the run up and taxi. So we taxi the airplanes around. That's another thing that a lot of people who aren't in the industry don't realize. Some pilots didn't even realize. I remember I was on training once and they said, where are you going for training? I said, oh, I have to do my recurrent for run up and taxi. And it was a pilot. And they said, why do you have to do sim work for a run up and taxi? And it was like, well, we run the aircraft too. And they're like, right, you do. So once all these components are changed, we go out as engineers and we'll run the aircraft. We'll taxi the aircraft. We'll actually, if it needs high power runs, for example, we did engine work, we will get clearance. We go onto the taxiway or the runway and we get to do full power. We make basically everything other than taking off and flying.
I didn't know that.
See, a lot of people don't realize that. So we do all the run up and taxi. And then we bring it back to the aircraft. Something is good or if it's not good, and then we'll sign it off. So that's one of the things at the end of the night. It's kind of funny because you've got everything done, and then all of a sudden, you get a light and you're like, oh. So you got to bring it back. You got to call all these people and say, you know what, we're going to keep that aircraft and check it out again. And then new shift will come in and check the work, right? But like I said, before we sign it off, we make sure operationally everything other than a test flight. If it requires a test flight, then a pilot will come in and fly that. But everything on the ground, we will run, we will operationally check, we'll have our equipment hooked up. So
that's really, really, really reassuring. There's I didn't know that. Crikey. I've only been in aviation for years, and it's amazing how much you just don't know. You just don't know other people's jobs, do you? So it's like, yeah, that's really interesting. So there's something I was going to ask you. I'll come back to me in a minute. A wisdom. Let's go to something else then. Yeah. So the thing that often freaks people out is that they see somebody like they're walking around and they think, they look a bit casual, and how they do it with the airport security as well. They say, oh, that person yawned when they're checking my bag, so I don't know if they're safe. And sometimes you see some of the engineers walking about and they just look a bit casual, and they're kind of like, oh. So just maybe just sort of really reinforce why that is a problem if they're a bit casual looking.
Well, you don't want an engineer looking all stressed out.
No, it's true. Actually, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
You know what? I think that's a tough question. It's something that it's a mixed bag of emotions. A lot of people will be like, "Oh, we're just mechanics," and I'm a strong believer. I'm like, no, we're not. We're engineers. We do this. So, a lot of it is, it's a hierarchy of things, right? Like you've got your executives, obviously, but then pilot is sort of the higher, and then it kind of works its way down. And then we do sort of get lumped with the unskilled labor. Like a lot of people look at us like that as well. So you might see someone who's like ambling about, but I know that we take our jobs very professionally. And that's why it's a big deal that we're trying to make ourselves known. Hey, this is what we do. This is the importance of it, and hold your head high on what we do. And I'm actually seeing the next generation of people of engineers will correct all these airlines news articles. Oh, mechanics, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, we're actually engineers, right? So we're trying to correct that. So maybe you'll see people not ambling about anymore. We do scramble a lot too, and don't worry about that as well. But we want essentially everyone to go and fly and make their vacation, right? So when we get a call, we'll try to run out and we'll try to do our best, but of course we'll do it safely. That's the other thing I try to tell traveling passengers is if your plane is, it's going to be delayed for maintenance, you should breathe a sigh of relief that we're doing everything to make sure. You see people, delayed, right? It's like, well, I kind of want you to make sure my plane is safe.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, some people have a sort of conspiracy theory running, and they go, oh, there's a tech delay. They're like, oh, yes. And then, so they either think that someone's making it up because, this beef dinners haven't been delivered, or they think that it's been sort of like, oh, that'll be all right. So everything you've been saying has been brilliant because that will hopefully dispel that. But unfortunately, the media portrays certain things, and it sticks in people's brains. So that's really helpful. So I remember what I was going to ask you earlier on. Now it's come back to me. Because pilots can only be on one type, but I know cabin crew can work across 2 or 3 different types of aircraft. I wonder how that is for engineers. So can you be on one type only, or can you be on a few?
No, you can be on multiple types of aircraft, but typically, what the carriers end up doing. So, for example, our crew of engineers, most high time engineers will be endorsed on all across the board. But there are crews that will work on certain aircraft or certain checks. So someone on a Q400, which is smaller propeller type of aircraft, if they've done most of their time on that aircraft and they've become endorsed on that aircraft, even though they're endorsed on the 737, 787, they will tend to get their work packages will be that Q400. And then in the night, what they generally try to do, that's something in safety that we try to make sure is, let's say you come in on a Friday night and there's multiple aircraft down, we'll make sure, or we'll try to ensure that you are just working on the 737, right? So you might have to work on 6 different aircraft to do 6 different dailies, but we'll try to make sure that you're just on the 737. You're not jumping from aircraft to aircraft in that one night, right? And then we'll have someone on the Q, someone on the 787, that sort of thing.
That's really interesting, because I was wondering how you would sort of like keep all that difference in your head, because I imagine they are quite different, all those different aircraft types you just said. I mean, I know Airbus has done their best to try and standardize, but they're still different, aren't they?
So that's where we and I try to push this. And every engineer knows when you say something like that, we are manual based. So nothing from memory. And that's something with something called human factors. That's another recurrent course that we teach. We always say you have checklists, you have manuals, and it's very sometimes, someone, I've changed 100 tires. I can do it with my eyes closed. No, you make sure you have that manual. So that is something that actually transport, myself and safety, we do audits. So everybody at most companies will have a tablet of some sort or a written manual of all the maintenance that has to be performed. If you cannot provide us, so if I come to you and you're changing a tire and I say, "Oh, hey Paul, where's your maintenance manual on your toolbox?" And you're, "Oh, don't worry, Jess, back at the hangar, it's all up here." You're gonna get stopped. You're gonna be talked to. Maintenance stops. You have to have your documentation next to you. Yeah, even though you've done this a million times, you need to make sure that you have that. And so that is that's an audit, and that will be an audit finding. So even you have supervisors, you have leads, team leads. That's something that they're looking for. It's not necessarily they're over your shoulder looking to see, how to change that tire. They're making sure, do you have that documentation sitting next to you? And what we reinforce is, sometimes, so most of us work night shift because that's when the planes aren't flying. So you need that because, if you are tired, you want to make sure that you don't skip a step, right? So you go through each and every step, even though I just did it on that last airplane, I'm going to go through my checklist again. I'm going to make sure that it's all done. So that is something that we drill. That is something that the safety industry drills. You can't perform your maintenance without that manual next to you. And there might be revisions that have been done from yesterday. It told you to, torque that tire to 500 foot-pounds. And all of a sudden now it's, torque that tire to 600. They might have changed that. It's all these documents are also dynamic. So again, like I said, with the company will change certain things. We need to make sure that we're up to date. So there's alerts too. So if a manufacturer were to change, a scheduled item, we get an alert, we push it out to everybody saying, "Hey, this is the change, make sure that," or this part has changed, even if it's a couple words changed in the document, we have to make sure. But it is the law for us to make sure that we are following that approved documentation. So when we sign out an aircraft, the actual verbiage says that the maintenance described has been performed in accordance with, and basically all your airworthiness documentation, all your standards have been followed. And that's what we're saying legally when we write. So
That's nice to hear. That's really good.
yeah.
You said the phrase human factors, and obviously that's a little bit of it. I wonder if you could just sort of like elaborate a little bit, because human factors is a big deal, as we know in commercial aviation, but how it plays out in your area.
So human factors, human factors, we break it down. There's something called the dirty dozen, right? So there's so many different, we're human, we're not robots. We can make mistakes. Let's face it, right? So like fatigue, lack of assertiveness, lack of communication, all of these things are factors that can affect our work. So if I have a bad day, with hubby at home, and then I come to work, what we try to do is, how can we mitigate these human factors? What can we put in place? So we call them safety nets. And that's something that I was part of as a safety team back in the airlines. And it's something that I teach actually in the college too. And it's actually stuff that you can apply to your everyday life, right? So you have all these human factors. And if we're fully aware of them, we can start to build safety nets in place. And the more safety nets and layers you put in place, even if one of those safety nets were to break, you have another one there, right? So it was the same thing when we were to get, an incident report, for example, organizationally, we tried to see how many layers can we put in place, or those safety nets, so that if someone's having a bad day, in that process, it will get caught again by another safety net, right? So that's something that we're, again, dynamic. We're always looking to see how many safety nets. We had, there was an incident once at a college where somebody had gotten hurt. They were doing something, and a propeller had hit somebody. And this was just these are students. Someone had, messed up. But again, it wasn't a who did this. It was like, okay, how can we make sure that no one gets hurt again, right? So again, a human factor is like, okay, well, did someone assume, was there a lack of communication? So we figure out how many of the human factors kind of took place and how many safety nets can we put in to mitigate all of those different things, right? So we changed fittings, we communicated better. I teach it now in class before they even get to the lab. So they're fully aware of the dangers of what can happen if they don't follow. People didn't have the proper checklists, right? So all of these things have to be in place, and so that these incidents don't occur.
Yeah.
So it's
I like
completely
stuff like
looked
that.
at.
I love that. I remember when a pilot said to me once that some of the levers on, because of things that happened years and years and years ago, that they've changed the levers and stuff are the shape of the thing that they are controlling. So just to make it really, so you get that tactile reinforcement. I'm putting the landing gear down, I'm adjusting the flap. So it's just, I love all that stuff just to try and, because we're, like you say, we're not robots, we're human. And I like the reminder of the Dirty Dozen. I wonder if you can quote the Dirty Dozen off the top of your head. You've probably taught it once.
I do. You know what? I've taught it so many times, and it is my passion. I actually went to England, Chester, and took the human factors in maintenance course there to become a trainer. And it was such a wonderful course. But yeah, I've taught it.
Just lovely, isn't it? What a place to visit.
It was really great. It was amazing. But yeah, it's human factors. It's so fascinating. It actually has piqued my interest so much that I mean, I'm almost 50, but I returned back to university online to take psychology. I mean, who knows if I'll ever get, everyone's like, so how close are you to your degree? I'm like, oh God, like I'm going to be like 70 by the time I get my degree. But it's more the fact, like I'll pick and choose the courses just because I just want to see how the brain works. Like, why do we get into this? Why do we do these? Like one of them, complacency, it's funny because everyone, that's a big dirty dozen. That's why we say don't work from memory. You need to work from a checklist, right? But complacency is one of those things too that it's sort of what you would never be able to leave your house in a car if we sort of didn't do things in automatic mode, right? So imagine I looked at my son. My son got his license just a couple of years ago, but when he first gets in the car, he's all like, oh, and looking everywhere and freaking out. You know what I mean? Turn the radio down, Mom. Don't talk to me when you're driving, kind of. But that's because the prefrontal cortex, he's fully aware. So you don't tend to actually make mistakes when you're using that portion of your brain, the executive thinking of your brain. But we can't fully function like that also, right? So we start to put things sort of into our muscle memory, right? So then now, you can drive the car, you have one hand on the car, you're listening to the radio, and that's good because you're not constantly in this alert mode. But the problem is when you also get into that, now you're getting to a fender bender, right? Because you were so complacent. So there is that sort of happy medium. So with us in the aviation world, we always want you to be using that prefrontal cortex. I used to teach, little tricks. So for example, the circuit breaker and oil cap being left off. I would always tell people, always just tell yourself, I'm putting, like, actually physically speak and say, I'm putting the left oil cap on, and then look at your watch at 7:47. I'm putting the left oil cap on. That is bringing that executive thinking. You're not in that complacent, yeah, I put it on. Right. Yeah. So just little things like that. You'll learn these sort of tricks in the trade. So it's kind of interesting that now that I'm taking like psychology courses, just to see like, how can we make sure that we don't make mistakes or mitigate? We always like to say mitigate. Like I said, we're humans, so it'll never be 100%, but we try to make it pretty close to, or there's safety nets involved so that it will catch us when we're not at our best. Right. So,
well, I think it's like when the pilots talk on our talks, they always talk about the fact that they don't touch a dial, do anything without checking with the other pilot, and then they confirm, they verify, just that process. And they bring it all to the front, isn't it? So that's a really good example. Yeah, I like that. It's good. That's very reassuring for people as well. And that it's throughout commercial aviation, this human factors awareness. I love that.
It's not just commercial aviation. It's all. So I work closely with friends in rotary wing, so helicopter world. And we call it, so here we call it M1. So it's a smaller general aviation. We all abide by the same rules, right? So it doesn't matter if you're a little flight school with a 2-seater, those engineers are following the same rules and regulations, human factors training, recurrent training, SMS, the safety management system. They're all following it, even though it's just a little smaller aircraft, right? So the rules don't change from airline to general aviation kind of thing. The safety nets that are in place are all the same. So everybody's safe when they're up in the air, right?
That's a great one. That's
Yeah.
that's a nice link as well. So I feel very honoured to have had you on with your experience and everything you know. And I just wondered if you got some sort of like closing comments for people to think about in terms of, like, so when Jessica Byrne takes a flight, does she worry about generally, does she worry about the maintenance and all this? And if not, why not?
No, you know what? Teaching out the systems and seeing everything full circle. So seeing the education and now teaching out the education from start of the engineer's journey to where they become, plus the regulatory bodies, plus all of these safety protocols that have been put in place. That's just the maintenance portion of it. When the pilots put on their layer of safety, I look at all of that. As soon as you start that engine, I can safely fall asleep and wake up at my destination. I have no worries in my mind. It is completely safe to be flying, especially with all of the things that we have in place.
Yeah, well, that's the mic drop moment, isn't it? That you get on board, you go to sleep. I'm not even worried about it. And that's like any airline in sort of like the developed world.
Yep, I know that everybody follows. We are all regulated, and it's all generally the same. We're all linked together because we fly similar type aircraft or the same type. So I don't have any problems. I know that everyone follows the same protocol. And it's actually funny, whenever I do see a nervous passenger, oh, what's that noise? What's this? I will reassure them. I actually tell them, I'm an aircraft maintenance engineer. This is what has to do. And it tends to actually calm them down.
Yeah.
Of course, just reassuring them that don't worry, it's good. She's good to go, right? So,
Oh, that's brilliant, Jessica Burns. That's been awesome. Thank you very much. So, do you have any sort of profile or anything that people can follow? Are you because there's a chap called is it Stig Aviation? He's an engineer and he goes around and he's posting all these things. I thought, I wonder if this is a thing now where all these engineers are out there posting their work. I don't know if you're doing the same or not.
I don't post my work. LinkedIn is pretty much the best place to find me. So under Jessica Dizon Burns, if you find me on LinkedIn, and I will usually post safety things or what's happening in the industry. And it's not just for public awareness, but it's for other engineers so that we can all take away, hey, I worked on that the other day. Okay, I'm going to think about that. And I always bring up human factors and things like that. So you can follow me there. And then I also do, it's called the Bell Cranks, BELLE, the Bell Cranks. It is a initiative for women in aircraft maintenance. Okay. So I'm trying to because there's only 2% in the world of AMEs are women. So
why is that?
I think it's just most people. I think back in the day it was okay. Being a mechanic or an engineer is a man's job, but now I think it's more awareness. Again, general public don't know what we do. So a female in school might not even consider or know what this is. So I go around and I try to promote our education to get into our field. And we've had an uptick. I mean, when I went to school, there was 4 of us. And I think that our intake at my college was 36 females, which was amazing for me. I was like,
oh, amazing.
So
because I didn't understand. I know the same with pilots. It's up at 5% at the moment globally. Yeah. And because when you look at them, you think, well, there's no reason why it's not like it's a particular strength thing, like there's no sort of like advantage thing that I can see. So it's probably just a historical thing. And I'm glad to see that happening. I was talking to a pilot the other day who, a guy from India, and he said that in his country that the ratio of female pilots and female engineers is much higher. The female pilots is at 25%. And I was like, I did not know that. Because globally it's like 5, isn't it? So
yeah, that's interesting.
So you're out there, you're also trying to get them through. Oh, brilliant. I've got 3 daughters and they're looking at what they're going to do. And And I noticed that there's obviously something about schooling that just sort of they sort of close off certain things. I said to one of them, "Do you want to be a pilot?" And they were like, "Nah, I don't really think I'm that good at maths and physics." It's like, because those are classically sort of like you have a sort of image that somebody has to be a certain way to do that. And I said, that's not going to stop you if you want to do it, But you're right. I've lost it.
Well, everyone always looks at me and they're like, "You're an aircraft engineer?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm actually 4'10", so it's kind of deceiving with this. I stand 4'10", 120 pounds soaking wet. So people see me, but I laugh because I can actually crawl into the smaller areas where a 6'5", 200-pound person cannot fit into. So when this is last quip, when I moved into the office, actually, it was quite funny because I think my first day I was in all office attire. They had to run out and grab me to get me into, they were like, "We can't fit. Can you do this?" I said, "Okay." So I put on coveralls and I ran in, right? So never stops. So.
Oh, brilliant. Jessica, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and all your expertise, and just fantastic. This can be so reassuring for people. So truly grateful to you. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.